Welcome everyone. I'm Rabbi Michael Bernholtz from Temple Beth Shalom in Vero Beach. As I just mentioned before, I'm actually at Temple Shari Shalom in Boynton right now. They were gracious to let me come and use one of their offices. It is so wonderful to have people. We literally have everyone from across the country here joining us for this amazing experience of counting the Omer. The Omer is a period of time that goes from the end of Passover, from the beginning of Passover for 50 days until we arrive at Shavuot, to arrive at Mount Sinai. Over the course of these 7 weeks, each week at noon Eastern time, I'm sorry, East Coast bias, do live on the East Coast, we will be having a different class. We're exploring Jewish rituals with the goal of having a robust Jewish debate of what is the most important Jewish ritual. Each week, different pairs of rabbis will be teaching, and I think there might be one trio, will be teaching these classes. If you're not able to join us live, do not worry. They are being recorded. We will be posting them on my congregation's Facebook channel. It's Temple Beth Shalom of Vero Beach. The Vero Beach is important. If you just put in Temple Beth Shalom, there are a lot of them. So we will make sure that there are links that do get shared. There will be a dedicated playlist. But if you also want to go onto our channel and watch my gardening videos, I do love teaching about Judaism and gardening, and so I'm happy to do that. It is wonderful to have all of you here. Today is the 4th day of the Omer, and so the blessing for counting the Omer is very simple. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav al sfirat ha'omer. Thank you, God, for giving us this opportunity as we count these days through this time period. If you have questions, please feel free to use the chat function. It is a wonderful way of being able to post questions to our presenters. There is also a raise hand function. And there are a number of us, the two teachers as well as myself, that are here doing technical support. We will be able to see sometimes. Chat is the best way to ask a question, but raising hand will get our attention. Waving your hands is probably going to be the hardest because I know I'm on a small laptop screen, so I won't be able to see everyone necessarily. And so the best we can do to be able to acknowledge who has a question and to be able to call on folks. But I don't want to take more time with explanations. I'm going to turn it over to our wonderful presenters, Rabbi Olshein and Rabbi Leah Berkowitz. It is wonderful. Now, and also just so I realize this, some of these presenters I'm only meeting through Zoom. I'm only meeting through Facebook. These are colleagues of mine that reached out on Facebook. I said, here's an idea. And these are wonderful colleagues that have stepped forward. I'm excited to learn as much as I'm excited to be able to share this. So Rabbi Olshein, Rabbi Berkowitz, I turn it over to you. Whoever is going first, I am happy to spotlight or both of you.
You can spotlight both of us. I think we're going to be conversational, even though I'm going first. I'm Rabbi Leah Berkowitz, Congregation Kolami in Elkins Park, Pennsylvania, outside of Philadelphia. We're really delighted to be here and really thankful to Rabbi Bernholtz for bringing us together for this learning opportunity. I was just telling some other colleagues that one of the great silver linings of the pandemic is that we realized that this technology enables us to learn across time zones and across geography, and to teach with colleagues across time and across geography. Cookie and Rabbi Olshein and I actually were in our year in Israel together. So this is a reunion of sorts. And it's also really wonderful because during this time, even those of us in small congregations, which is most of the people in this learning opportunity, even people in small congregations have been able to have more guest speakers and have more diverse speakers and conversations because of all this technology and because you all have gotten really good at using this technology over the last few years. So thank you to Rabbi Bernholtz. Thank you to all of you for participating. Let's start with a blessing, excuse me, blessing for study of Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, eternal our God, sovereign of the universe, who makes us holy with commandments and commands us to immerse ourselves in the words of Torah. So with that, I'm going to put This is our source sheet. I am going to share my screen, but if you're somebody who likes to read ahead, or if you're somebody who likes to look at things afterwards, you'll have access to that through that link. Let me bring this up. Okay, so our ritual that we're starting with is, can everybody see this? Is candle lighting, specifically on Shabbat, though we do light candles at other times. And we just wanted to open with a little connection question. If you can put in the chat, you can answer either of these questions. What are some experiences that you have lighting candles, either in a ritual purpose or otherwise? And what are some feelings and emotions that you experience when you light candles for a ritual purpose or otherwise? So you can put your answers to that in the chat.
Everyone's shy. Oh, there
just takes a little while to fear that they will take too long to light or go out as saying prayer. Yes, I have a lot of associations because we're both in the camp world of, and also we did some outdoor Hanukkah lightings this year and last year, you know, that all the different ways we try to keep candles from going out when we're outside. I think in Hanukkah we used a fish tank. That was fun.
We have people that don't like the match, and we have people that don't like the little fire gun. And it never seems to work, that little fire gun.
From an Agudas Israel member, enjoy doing the blessing with the congregation, feels communal. Porter Moore says it creates a moment. Now there is something slowing about lighting a candle, calling attention, feeling of warmth, but not necessarily physical warmth. From Brandon. I feel I'm Anne Beauchamp says, I feel I'm connecting with all the people who are lighting candles everywhere. Marie Fishman says, feeling of warmth and brightness in a moment of darkness. Tiffany says, creating a feeling of togetherness.
Well, keep putting those answers in the chat.
Yes. And I know that for me, and one of the reasons I picked this this section was that for me, Shabbat candlelighting was the one ritual that my family did consistently throughout my childhood. And my parents had an argument over whether to use a match or whether to use the stove lighter. So I do also think about that. Rabbi Jeff Goldwasser says, lighting the candles, which we don't usually use for illumination these days, transform the moment from the ordinary into the enchanted. Yeah, that's a good point. Except for when there's a power failure, we really don't use candles in a utilitarian way. We use them to create some sort of ambiance or space. Wonderful. I like from the ordinary to the enchanted. I might use that. Okay, so in our first section, we're going to take a look at and you can keep putting your answers in the chat. We're just going to make sure my people who are watching from my synagogue know that I always put too many texts on the sheet and then I have to talk really fast and we never get to everything. So, which is another reason I gave you the link. I don't know, Rabbi Olshein, do you have the same problem? Yeah. Oh, and Rabbi Bernholtz does as well. Okay. So why do we light candles in the first place? And actually, we got lucky with this one, and we didn't actually, I don't know that we were actually as familiar with the text that is going to help make our case. But we actually have an argument in Talmud as to why Shabbat candles are the most important ritual, and we'll get to that in a moment. But what we often get as a question is, why are there two Shabbat candles? And that is, there's probably, for everything, there's usually a practical reason, a textual reason, a spiritual reason, a Kabbalistic reason. But we think of the two candles, and we're actually going to look at instances where there might be more than two candles, that we have two versions of the 10 Commandments, one in Exodus, one in Deuteronomy, and each of them has a different commandment to keep Shabbat. So we have, in Exodus, we have remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. And in Deuteronomy, we have observe the Sabbath day and keep it holy as your God Adonai has commanded you. So we have Shamor v'Zachor, these two different commandments to observe Shabbat. If you're familiar with the song V'Shamru, you will see Shamor v'Zachor as part of that as part of that song and part of that text. Keep and remember, or observe and remember.
So,
okay.
Rabbi Berkowitz, I want to
Yes.
focus for just a second on this word shamor, because I think
Yeah.
a lot of people, when they see the translation as observe, they can also think of other ways to translate that word. And so thinking about shamor as protect, as well as to observe or to keep Shabbat. And I'm just going to throw it out and ask for answers in the chat. You know, what is the difference between observing Shabbat and protecting the Shabbat? What's the fundamental difference for ourselves if we translate it as protect Shabbat versus if we translate it as observe? And does it make a difference with respect to being a Reformed Jews? Does our Reformed theology play into that? I'm always curious.
Oh, and I just want to point out, Rabbi Goldwasser made a very important correction. Shamor v'zachor is actually from L'chadodi. V'shamru, also v'shamru comes from the same word shamor, so it's the same philosophical thing, but the exact wording shamor v'zachor is from L'chadodi. You were right. So yes. Okay, so we're keeping the memory and passing it on. And we have another comment up top. It slows the evening down as we sit and watch the candles drip before cleaning and bustling about. Yes. I know I have a lot of memories of being in such a hurry to get out of the house for either a Jewish reason, or a lot of times it was a high school band or theater reason, that we would have to put our candles in the sink. So we didn't always have that luxury of sitting and watching them drip, but we try. Observe can be at a distance without actually participating. Protecting is more engaged. Remember refers to the past. Observe places us in the present. Oh, lovely. Okay, so here we have sort of our philosophical reasons. Remember, keep and remember, or keep and observe. So we have one candle for each of those commandments, but we also have this sort of practical complicated thing in that we're not supposed to light fire on Shabbat. So we have in Exodus 35, Moses then convoked the whole Israelite community and said to them, "These are the things that the Eternal has commanded you to do. On 6 days work may be done, but on the 7th day you have a Sabbath of complete rest, holy to the Eternal. Whoever does any work on it shall be put to death. You shall kindle no fire throughout your settlements on the Sabbath day." So we have this really harsh punishment for neglecting this particular mitzvah. And part of the restrictions on Shabbat is that we don't light fire. But then we might run into a problem if we're in a pre-electric, pre-industrial society. What's going to happen if you don't light any fire during the Sabbath? It's going to be dark and it's going to be cold. So we have this fix, which is our Shabbat candles, which we actually light before the sun goes down on Shabbat. So actually, when Rabbi Olshein and I lived in Jerusalem, there's a siren 18 minutes before sunset, and that siren is to remind you to light your Shabbat candles. Which is a very, very cool thing, though I don't know that I would have picked a siren as the way to signify that. What if one candle goes out, or if one candle is not bright enough? That's a good question. I don't know that I'm going to have a satisfying answer to that. I think that as the years wore on, we came up with more clever solutions on how to maintain light and heat during the and cooking facilities. So, you know, things on timers, other things that are lit before Shabbat that we think will keep burning the entire time. These aren't necessarily meant to be candles that you would read by or do work by. They're really, as we'll see, they're really only meant for ambiance and for sanctity, but also to make sure that you don't trip over anything. Stoking an existing, we're getting into some real Talmudic questions here. Stoking an existing fire to be permitted. It's one of the things that they argue about in the Talmud for several pages. So I don't know that I can answer that right away. And if there's only candlelight, it's difficult to do any work. These are good comments. So Rashi says, Shabbat candles are obligatory since it is kavod to honor Shabbat, since a meal is not significant unless there is light as if it is daytime, which actually would imply that your candles are giving off a lot more light than I would say my candles give. So people might have been lighting oil, they were probably lighting oil lamps. Now we use wax candles, but they were probably lighting something that gave off a not insignificant amount of light. And then this one was actually my favorite. Shabbat candles are an obligation because of shalom bayit, peace in the house, so that a person should not trip over a stick or a rock. The candles need to be long in order that they last the night. So this actually comes into the questions that we had in the chat. Because without this, it is a blessing said in vain. So we want to make sure that the Shabbat candles are going to last through the night so that we are not stumbling around in the dark. And I'm sure that there's both a physical and a metaphorical understanding of that. And also, Rabbi Bernholtz says they were used to a darker world as well. So we're also used to, so they were used to, it wasn't like, you know, they had the big city lights and then the lights went off and they couldn't, and their eyes needed to adjust. They were probably a little more used to things being somewhat dark at night.
By the way, I just want to jump in for a second about that, because it says they have to last through the night. Think about the Shabbat candles that we light today. They're about yay long, 4 inches long. Yeah. And how long do they last before they go out? They don't last through the night anymore. So
right. They might last through dinner. Yeah, they might last through dinner, but they're probably not going to last all night. And again, these are probably, as we'll see in the Talmud text we're about to look at, these are going to be, these are likely oil lamps. So an oil lamp might burn longer. And also, I think you would have a lot more control over how long by the size of the oil lamp and how full it was. I think that's probably a little more precise in terms, rather than a wax candle. Okay. So this is where, and I know Rabbi Olshein used to be a lawyer. So this is where we were like, oh, this was our discovery. We found this great text that actually makes our point pretty well. Rava said, so this is in the Talmud, Rava said, it is obvious to me that there is a fixed list of priorities. And there's a lot of conversations about this in the Talmud, about when you're poor or when someone else is poor, what are the things that they absolutely need to have? So we just, for instance, celebrated Passover. And there are lots of conversations in the Talmud about the minimum things that you need. Like, even if you are poor, you need to have 4 cups of wine. You might think that 4 cups of wine are a luxury, but if you're helping out a poor family for Passover, you do have to supply them not only with matzah, but with enough for 4 cups of wine. So there are lots of conversations like this in the Talmud about when you're poor and you can't do everything, what do you do? When a person is poor and must choose between purchasing oil to light a Shabbat lamp for his home or purchasing oil to light a Hanukkah lamp, the Shabbat lamp for his home takes precedence. That is due to peace in his home. Without the lighting of that lamp, his family would be sitting and eating their meal in the dark. Because you're also not supposed to use the Hanukkah candles for a useful purpose. They're supposed to just be there to publicize the miracle. Similarly, if there is a conflict between acquiring oil to light a lamp for his home and wine for the sanctification, Kiddush of Shabbat day, so we were already saying Kiddush wine is really important because it's something that you need to supply people on Passover. But here, the lamp for the home takes precedence due to peace in the home. So again, we don't want you stumbling around in the dark, so this is going to be our high priority. However, Rava raised a dilemma. When the conflict is between oil for a Hanukkah lamp or wine for Kiddush of Shabbat day, what is the ruling of the case? Oh, okay. I thought I had actually, we're going to skip over the Hanukkah candles versus, I thought I had taken this out, the Hanukkah candles versus the Kiddush, because that's not what we're talking about. But you have the link to this text. If you want to go through the whole argument, you can do that. So they sort of end up with this hierarchy of different rituals, but the Shabbat lamp is going to be first, and it's going to be first for a really practical reason. It's going to, because, you know, in a ritual way, the Shabbat candles and the Kiddush wine perform sort of the same function. They sanctify the day. But in a practical way, it's, especially if you are going to be drinking wine, it's very important that you're not going to trip. And it's very important that you're not going to be eating in the dark. Okay, so then we come to Rav Huna, who says, one who is accustomed to kindle lights on Shabbat and Hanukkah will be rewarded and have children who are Torah scholars, one who will disseminate the light of Torah. So here we're getting into sort of the metaphorical and the blessing. And they also then go into this whole sort of taxonomy of what are the rewards for different ritual mitzvot. What are the for a mezuzah, for a talit? These are all things you sort of have a measure for measure. If you're lighting lamps, you're going to light the lamps of Torah by having children who are scholars. If you have a mezuzah, your house will be especially beautiful, etc. So the Gemara relates, Rav Huna was accustomed to pass by and teach at the entrance of the house of Rabbi Avin the carpenter. He saw that Rabbi Avin was accustomed to kindle many lights in honor of Shabbat. Rav Huna said, 2 great men will emerge from here. So this might also be something that promoted this idea of having 2 candles. Indeed, Rav Idi bar Avin and Rav Leah bar Avin, his 2 oldest sons, emerged from their family, and these are great Torah scholars. On a similar note, the Gemara relates, Rav Hista was accustomed to pass by and teach at the entrance of Rav Shezvi's father's family home. He saw that Rav Shezvi, I've actually never seen that name before, father was accustomed to kindle many lights in honor of Shabbat. Rav Chisda said, a great person will emerge from here. And indeed, Rav Shezvi emerged from them. So here we have this argument that not only are the Shabbat candles, or in this case, the Shabbat lamp, is it the most important mitzvah because you need to prioritize it so that there's peace in your home, but also that by performing this mitzvah, similar to other mitzvot that have sort of spiritual rewards. The spiritual rewards for this is children that are Torah scholars, and that's considered a very high reward in Jewish culture, probably still today. If your child becomes, I was going to say a doctor, but if your child achieves any really high level of education, that's going to bring you a lot of nachas. So it's always debatable whether being a rabbi counts in that realm. My brother's a doctor, so this always comes up. So you have this spiritual reward. I'm going to see if I'm having trouble calling you by your title, Rabbi Olshein. I'm going to ask if you have anything to add, and then see if anyone has questions before we go on to the next section.
The only thing I have to add is just thinking about this connection between doing a mitzvah and the reward that you will get. For some of us post-Enlightenment Jews, when I teach about what is the reward for doing a mitzvah, it's not necessarily that something good will happen, that we are doing mitzvot for the purpose of doing the mitzvah, right? It's not necessarily a reward scheme in Judaism. And so this text kind of goes against that teaching a little bit, right? It says that if you do the mitzvah, if you light, then good things will come to you. That's hard for me because I understand that bad things happen to good people, bad things happen to those who do mitzvot. So this text is a little bit challenging for me theologically as a post-Enlightenment Jew.
Yes, this is a Jewish prosperity gospel, if you will. I hadn't thought of it that way. And that's where it's sort of important to point out, this is sort of in the category of legend. You do have at the beginning of this, you have the halacha, you have the law, but then later we're getting into agadah, which is legend. So this is sort of a legend that this is the reward for this kind of thing. And the rabbis do, in frequent places, and I know it makes us uncomfortable, the rabbis do talk about all sorts of mitzvot as protection from danger, and that, you're right, that's not how we think today. But it's still a nice image that lighting the lights might result in light in a different sense. Rabbi Bernholtz says, does it have to be absolutely connective? Not everyone who lights candles will produce a Torah scholar, but they're showing that rituals have positive impacts. And I think that regardless of our post-Enlightenment philosophy, we might still say, like, there's something that feels good about bringing light into the world. Whether or not we think that has a direct connection to an outcome that we're adding light to the world. Other questions
Or comments?
or comments? All right, while you're thinking, I'm going to turn things over to Rabbi Olshein for some of the mechanics of candle lighting. Oh, and just a warning as we get in here, we're going to get into some things that are really misogynist. And we put them in there because we wanted to be able to talk about them, but obviously we do not endorse them, or I don't. I'm assuming Rabbi Olshein also does not. Okay, go ahead.
All right. So we're going to continue with this Mishnah Torah on Shabbat. And it says here that the kindling of a lamp on Shabbat is not optional. That if one wants, one kindles, and if one does not want, one does not kindle. That seems a little strange, right? And it is not a commandment that we are not obligated to pursue until one has done it. For example, an eruv for courtyards or lifting, or meaning washing the hands before eating. Rather, it is an obligation. So it sort of, to me, says we kind of got to be in the zone before it becomes an obligation to us at this point. It says, even if one does not have anything that he or she will be able to eat, he begs at the doors of neighbors and takes oil and kindles the lamp, since this is included in the rule of enjoyment on Shabbat. So part of, in this text, it talks about lighting candles is actually for sort of the oneg Shabbat, the joy of Shabbat. And maybe we haven't considered that beforehand. But it also says that we are obligated to make sure we do it, right? Even so much as if you have to go to your neighbor and ask for help. And there, I believe this creates a communal obligation to help our neighbors observe Shabbat if they want to observe Shabbat. So I wonder sometimes if when we're making donations to Jewish Family Services for their food pantry, then maybe we shouldn't drop a box of candles in as well. Think about that. All right. It says, and one is obligated to bless before the kindling. And here is where we get our blessing. It says, blessed are you, eternal our God, ruler of the universe, the one who makes us holy with your commandments and commands us to kindle a Shabbat lamp. Notice in this teaching that it says a Shabbat lamp, the light of Shabbat, ner shel Shabbat, right? It's not nerot or candles or lights of Shabbat. It's singular, which is an interesting concept that maybe some of you would like to comment on in the chat. And it says, we say this blessing in the way that one blesses over all things over which which one is obligated to do by the words of the sages. So notice right there, it doesn't say necessarily that God is the one that creates the obligation. Here it actually says that one is obligated to do by the words of the sages, that our teachers are making this are creating this obligation for us to say this blessing. We do a close reading. I see in here, Thea in the chat says, lighting candles, doing this mitzvah might indicate that you live by Jewish principles, and if so, your children will be brought up correctly and therefore succeed. Beautiful connection. Yes.
Yes. And I like this idea of sort of this symbol. Like I was telling you, I have this memory, like this was the only thing we did. Like we would light the candles and then we would eat a pizza and then we would run to whatever performance we were doing on Friday night. So, but there was still that little symbol, and we'll see a little bit later, it really became this moment of sort of messaging to the household or messaging to oneself that something's different right now.
Yeah.
I do want to just add to what Cookie said about, Rabbi Olshein said about the communal obligation. You might notice that we kindle Shabbat lights in our synagogues, which is sometimes complicated because we're kindling them usually after we would have been if we were doing it at home. And that actually stemmed from a time when the synagogue was kind of an Airbnb. If people were coming in from out of town and they had nowhere to stay, they might sleep in the synagogue. And so things like doing kiddush and motzi and candlelighting on the bima are actually a remnant of that time where we started, because it was our communal responsibility. If you weren't, hopefully somebody was going to take them for Shabbat dinner. But if not, the travelers would be able to perform these mitzvot by being part of the synagogue community. And nowadays, I think we've kept that tradition in the Reform movement because we know that there are a lot of people who don't light at home for one reason or another. So we're doing it in the synagogue.
Yeah. By the way, imagine if we all followed what Rabbi Berkowitz just said about inviting someone home for Shabbat dinner. In Jerusalem, there's this one guy that everybody knows that you could go to at the Western Wall, and if you didn't have a place to go for Shabbat dinner, you'd get an invitation. Think about the way that that builds community and acceptance and inclusion. And if we were to create that sort of ritual somehow, even inviting someone out to dinner, a stranger, I know it's difficult to invite strangers these days, but a stranger out to dinner, even to a restaurant, to celebrate Shabbat, to increase the joy of Shabbat after Shabbat worship so that no one goes home alone. Imagine what that would do to our community. All right, let's look at the tour. Here we have both, and notice it's in brackets. It says both men and women are commanded to lie, but women are more commanded than men, as it says in the Midrash, since she extinguished the lamp of the world, meaning she caused the death of the first human. Okay, so there's all sorts of misogyny there, right? Now, let me tell you that the first time in my synagogue in Florida, where I invited up a single man to come and light Shabbat candles in front of our community, it was about, I don't know if it was 6 weeks in, to give him the honor of lighting Shabbat candles, I had some people freak out. And I said, of course there were women there, obviously, at the service as well. I said, well, what's the problem? He said, well, it's woman's job. I said, actually, no, it's not just woman's job to light Shabbat candles. It's all of our jobs. It's become custom, minhag. And according to this teaching, it says we're more commanded, but that doesn't excuse or release men from lighting Shabbat candles. The first time that I had a gay couple come up, a husband and a husband come up and light candles, I had a few people that stopped as well. And I, again, stopped to explain we are a fully egalitarian movement, the Reform movement, and men are obligated to light Shabbat candles as well. To be fully inclusive, this is who we are going to be. So I don't like this, that since we caused the death of the first human.
Which, by the way, just as an explanation of that, they mean by eating the fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and evil and bringing death into the world. So that is what they are referring to.
Yes, it all goes back to Eve, right? And it says, and the Rambam explains that women are more obligated because they are found at home and they take care of household needs. Again, this is reflective of the era in which it was written. I dare say that especially during the pandemic, when both men and women in traditional households were at home, a man was just as, hopefully was taking care of household needs. Well, I'll leave my commentary on feminism or egalitarianism more correctly there. All right, so Mishnah Shabbat. It says this Mishnah concludes the agadic, or the tale-telling treatment of the topic of kindling Shabbat lights, and it says for 3 transgressions, women are punished and die during childbirth. So notice that they're making a connection between the two here. It says for the fact that they are not careful in observing the laws of a menstruating woman. 2, in separating challah from the dough. So when someone is baking challah, you take a small piece of it and throw it into the oven, usually as part, sort of reminiscent of the sacrifice of temple times. And then it says, and in lighting the Shabbat lamps. So the 3rd reason for punishing women in childbirth was for failure to actually appropriately light Shabbat lamps. I'm going to just let that sit there and ask if you have any comments on it.
We were debating whether or not to include this one, and I want to add, obviously, and we saw earlier that there are texts that imply that, or not even imply, say outright that failure to observe Shabbat rituals, the punishment is death. And while we don't want to touch that with a 10-foot pole, we do use it as a way of seeing this was something that was really important. Rabbi Lazban Ostrov said, finally getting our sisterhood to give candlesticks to bat and bar mitzvah students, not just the girls. And I have to say, that's like been the last thing, even for me in the synagogues I've been in, calling up a man to do candlelighting has been something I've had to train myself to do, even though I would say that a man or a woman or any person of any gender could do any ritual in the synagogue. For some reason, I always associate candlelighting with women, as many of us do.
Yeah.
The reason I think that some of these, that I don't like the way that it's framed, but that these mitzvot are put directly on the women, is that these are things that are done that men don't necessarily have control over. So these are things that a woman needs to do so that a man can be properly observant. Again, don't like it. Don't think it's relevant today, but this is probably the context thinking, they need to make sure that they're on top of these things so that a man doesn't accidentally transgress. I think I might have made it worse. I want to just add some of the comments we had earlier about the communal element. It doesn't have to be each of us every week. If a community had a designated, I can host a few for dinner each week, we could fulfill this act of hospitality as a community. That'd be really great. And Taylor says, that piece is my favorite part of my personal Shabbat practice, with so many dinners by candlelight with good friends, with conversations that last beyond when the candles are totally melted down.
For me, that gets the comment of what a wonderful world it would be, right? For both of those comments. If everybody had a place to go to celebrate the joy of Shabbat, and if we enjoyed it so much that it lasted far after the candles were burned in. All right, so let's take a look at Shulchan Aruch. And this is going to teach us about sort of the how part. It says, be meticulous to make certain to beautify the lighting of the Shabbat light. There are those who light 2 candles in relationship to the way we are commanded to honor Shabbat. And this is what we started with Rabbi Berkowitz, to remember Shabbat and to keep Shabbat. All right. And then Moses Isserles, and he's in the 1500s, I believe, mid 1500s. He said there are also those who light 3 or even 4 lights, which is their custom. You can always add to the light with more lights for additional family members or for whatever reason, but you can never subtract. And so I'd love us all to consider that there are families who take Rabbi Isserles' comments to heart. And so they light the 2 candles and they add 1 for each child. There are also families who light the traditional 2 candles and add for any child who might have died. So a way to remember a missing family member, a missing child in particular. So there are lots of ways to beautify how we do this and to raise it up. So we always say that it's not that we light 2 candles, it's we light a minimum of 2 candles, right? It's in our candlelighting observance in our ritual. I see here that Leah has put in there, isn't it interesting that this is a time-bound mitzvah? Time-bound commandments are usually those done by men. So there's a whole conversation about what's time-bound and what's not. This obviously is, people will say, 18 minutes before official sundown, and everybody who gets one of those Jewish calendars, I hate to say, from a Jewish funeral home, will give you the exact time by which you are supposed to light Shabbat candles, no later than. If you chose to start your Shabbat at high noon on Friday and light your Shabbat candles, you could start your Shabbat Friday at high noon and light your Shabbat candles. Much like you can say Havdalah, the end of the ceremony ending Shabbat, days after Saturday night at sundown, and you can expand your Shabbat as long as you would. I shouldn't say as long as you would like, because there are some rules on it.
But we found when we were living in Israel that you could start saying Shabbat Shalom on Wednesday afternoon, and you could do Havdalah until Tuesday night. So you really could stretch it out almost the entire week if you wanted. Obviously that didn't really work in practice, but there was a general, the arc of the week culminated at Shabbat.
All right, we are at the Shulchan Aruch and Orach Chaim. So Rama, this is his teaching. He says, some say to make the bracha or the blessing before lighting. Some say to make it after lighting, and in order to accomplish a very before the action, do not get pleasure from the candles until after the bracha. You can do this by putting your hand over the candle after you light it, and then you make the bracha, and then you take your hand away. So Shulchan Aruch is 15th century-ish, and I would say ish because I can never remember the exact days. But think about what this means. This is where some people get this custom of drawing the light to them and then covering their eyes. I want you to imagine that we say what are called unified blessings. And generally we say the blessing before and then we do an act, and together it's called a unified blessing. But when should we be doing that? For when does Shabbat really, really start? So there's this legal fiction that is created here, because here we light the candle and then we say the blessing. But when does Shabbat start? It's really the only example of doing the action first and then saying the blessing. So that's why we create the legal fiction of creating the barrier between ourselves and the light until after the blessing is recited. Okay, because we generally want to say the blessing first and then do the action, but we can't light the fire of the Shabbat candles once the blessing is said. So some of us grew up with that custom and some of us didn't. I grew up in a classical Reformed congregation, and I never heard of this drawing the light to my eyes. And, you know, in my era of classical Reform, we lit the candle, said the blessing, and moved on. It was a moment marking time, and it was less about the spirituality of the moment of creating sacred time, creating sacred space in our homes and in our synagogues. So I want you to imagine, what does it mean for us to actually take the moment to light the candles and take a breath first? And then, if we so choose, because we're all about choice after education, right? To draw the light close to us and cover our eyes and actually take another breath and think about that transition, that moment that we are intentionally creating when we light Shabbat candles and saying the blessing and reminding ourselves that we are obligating ourselves to doing something Jewish, at least in this moment, and at this moment as the sun is going down, and maybe throughout the entirety of Shabbat. And then we take our hands away and we stop for just one more moment to look at the candles as they burn brightly, and then move on to the next blessing. Even just those 3 moments of pausing can bring another sense of spirituality into our observance of Shabbat. And now we're going to talk about Techinas.
Yes, and actually you made an excellent segue, but I did want to put a pin in that idea of this moment, of the making of the moment, but I just want to see if we have questions or comments. So we had a question of, what is a bracha? A bracha is a blessing or prayer that we say over a mitzvah that we're about to do. And
it has that same Hebrew root, baruch, in it. It's just a different form of the word beracha, which is often translated to mean bend, which is often related to the idea of saying a prayer and bending our knees and bowing.
Yes, and I like Rabbi Berkowitz says here, ritual as a spiritual speed bump. Slow down, take in the moment, feel the action, open the senses and the spirit. So we're going to get to something called techinas, not to be confused with the sesame paste. A techina is a kind of prayer, actually usually a creative prayer. And one of the reasons I think this is going to balance out some of our misogynist stuff from earlier, because this was something that really, this is a part of Judaism we don't know a lot about, and that tends to center women. So techinas were these creative prayers. If you're familiar with the word kavanah, like to set an intention for an activity, and a great deal of them center around the lighting of Shabbat candles. And I will say about techinas, a lot of them were written for women, not all of them were written by women. Some of them are attributed to a woman, but it might have been a man pretending to be a woman. But these are prayers that are written specifically to help set intentions, mostly for a female identifying audience. Sometimes written by them, sometimes written for them.
One thing in addition, Rabbi Berkowitz, in addition to what you're saying, I think is really important. They're very personal and they're very homebound. And you'll see that they're often related to children, family related. They are, no matter who actually wrote them, it shows a different side of Jewish prayer than what we see in our Siddur, in our prayer book. So.
Yes, and you can actually see, it's very personal, and it's in some ways it's political in that you can see whether it's being written by a woman or for a woman. you can see that it very much promotes, these are the values that we want our women to have, or our families to have. And that they tend to be thinking of things in a very gender binary way. So, so this one is from 18th century Ukraine. And what I wanted to say, why I thought this was a really good segue, is that one of the reasons I think techinas became a really big thing around lighting candles is I imagine that if you are a female identified person playing traditional female roles in a household, or particularly in a Jewish household, you're being pulled in a gazillion different directions. It's probably still true of anybody, but it was very true if you're running a household, if you have a lot of children, you have a lot of responsibilities. This is a moment when you're doing this that you just have 5 seconds to chill out and think about what you want for yourself and for your family. So I like to think that a lot of women use this time for meditation without a text, but as the rabbis often did, and as people throughout Jewish history have often done, they've sort of said, well, you can say whatever you want, but we're worried that you're not going to know what to say. So we're going to give you a lot of options, or we're going to give you a lot of text, to the point where we're almost shoving out your own creativity and intention. But when we think about this as a custom, it's something we might re-embrace for all genders. So this one's from 18th century Ukraine. We don't know if Sarah Bas Tovin was an actual woman or if this is a pen name. And we have Rabbi Bernhold says, pulling in the light and releasing the negative. Oh, and that's in response to Rabbi Loz ben Ostrav. I shake my hands to bring in the light and say I'm shaking off the negativity of the week and bringing in light and peace. I really like that. Lord of the world, may my observance of the commandment of the kindling of the lights be accepted as an act of the high priest. So this is a really big deal to say that a woman in 18th century Ukraine kindling her Shabbat candles is equivalent to the high priest kindling the lights in the temple. Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. This means your speech is a light to my feet. May the feet of my children walk on God's path. So again, we have the idea of we want our children to be scholars. May my kindling of the lights be accepted, so that my children's eyes may be enlightened in the dear Torah. I also pray over the candles that my observance of the commandment may be accepted by the dear God, be blessed, may be accepted by the dear God, be blessed like the light which burned from olive oil in the temple and was not extinguished. So this is a very traditional one. This is, may my observance of this ritual be acceptable. May it lead to the growth and development and learning of my children, and may it foster the light of Torah. So that's a pretty traditional one.
Can we focus for just a second, Rabbi, on
Yeah.
this idea of making a connection all the way back to the sacrifices? I mean, if you're a traditional Jewish woman in the 1700s in Ukraine, you may have a feeling for longing for the past, right? Most of us, I would say, in the 21st century American, practicing 21st century American Reform Judaism, I'm not so certain we have that longing for the time of the sacrifices or the longing of the time of the temple. And yet here in her prayer, this woman, she is trying to connect back to an era 1700 years before where sacrifices were being made. It's an interesting thing for us to think about how connected do we want to go back? How far do we want to go back in our connections to traditional Judaism?
Yes. And you'll see a lot of that language in traditional prayer books, sort of equating or connecting to the actions of the high priest. You'll see less of it in Reform Judaism because there's some things that were problematic about the temple and things that we don't want to go back to. But what do we want to connect with? And that thing, I find this to be a really interesting snapshot of American Jewish history. So this is a techina that was written, I don't know who this person was, but it was written for Jews living in America. And one thing that we know about Jews living in America in the early 20th century is they're immigrants, they're working really hard, and there are Sunday laws in a lot of places, which means that if you want to make a living, you have to work on Shabbos. And this is something that causes some people, a lot of heartache. Some people are, we're in the Golden Medina, we can do whatever we want. This is great. We're out of the shtetl. But there are some people for whom this is heartbreaking, and this reflects that. But today we are in exile, where the struggle to make a living is so great that the conditions under which we live often make it impossible to keep the Sabbath and festivals according to Jewish law. Kind Father in heaven, for nearly 2,000 years we have wandered, driven from one land to the next, and we have had no rest. But we have always carried your holy Torah with us, and wherever we have been, the Torah has been with us. The persecutions we endured in other lands have driven us here to America, which serves as a refuge for all the persecuted and suffering. But life here is very hard, and because of our many sins, the Jewish children must profane Sabbath and festivals. I am not, God forbid, accusing anyone of doing this to anger you or to blaspheme your holy name, but the times and conditions bring this about. So here we have, and I don't know again if this was written by a woman or for a woman to say, or actually this one could have been said by people of any gender, that when we're lighting the Shabbat candles, we might be doing it and then be on our way to work, or we might be coming from work. There's this acknowledgement of, I know it's Shabbat, I know what I'm supposed to be doing, I can't do it, and I'm praying for forgiveness. And I think there's something really beautiful about that. And I think that there's something that sort of hints at later innovations within Judaism, that we do want to be a little bit more lenient and compassionate.
So I also want to jump in just to share. Imagine you're working in New York, you have to work on Saturday, and you're saying this, please forgive me, right? This is an al-chet shachatanu lefanecha, right? God, I know I'm going to sin tomorrow, but here I am, and I'm trying the best that I can. Imagine, if you will, that in the Reform movement, we end up with the Friday night service being the central service of our worship, as opposed to more traditional Jews who are really mostly observing Shabbat at home, especially the women and the children, right? And then their central service is going to be on Saturday. So I think that this recognizes that push-pull of the early immigrant situation. And we, as modern Reform Jews, we have kept this tradition as Friday being our central service in many locations, and Saturday being the smaller service even to this day, 100 years later.
And what's really interesting about that is that has now, I believe, created a different challenge for modern Jews and modern synagogues, in that now there's a lot of choices as to how you can spend your Friday night. I would say the same is true for Saturday morning, but we put things on Friday night, Saturday morning, and Sunday morning because those were times when we were available, and now we're competing with children's athletics and yoga and meditation classes and brunch and all of these things. So we have a lot, which is a great luxury and privilege that we have to make those choices. But it is one of the challenges of having the main service be on Friday night, is that a lot of times, when I was growing up, my brothers were both in the marching band. We're competing with football games and high school theater and things like that. Or just, staying home and watching the Friday night television lineup, which was supposedly very good in the late 80s, early 90s. So
I think we have one more, Rabbi, in our last 3 minutes.
Oh yeah, so I'm actually going to, since I put I'll put the text in the chat again. So I've added 2 modern ones for you to look at, but I really want to get to this last question. So if you were saying, and again, this was a tradition that was really sort of developed around women and women's roles, because women were the ones traditionally lighting the candles, but now we all light candles, or we all are allowed to light candles. What might we say in a candlelighting techina? We have a comment from Marie. I just wanted to share something off the subject about inclusion. I converted to Judaism. Yesterday, I went to lunch with friends and they inquired what drew me to Judaism. I must be honest, the first things that drew me to Judaism were not related to the typical religious reasons. I was first attracted because of the idea and the importance of giving to and sticking up for people less fortunate myself, the underdog, but also my feeling of inclusion when I attended Shabbat services. I'd gone through my whole life feeling othered, separated, alienated, discriminated against, disability. When I was invited to Shabbat, a discussion about inviting someone to Shabbat dinner, I was invited to the Shabbat service, I was welcomed. I had never been welcomed with open arms anywhere until I went to Temple Beth Shalom of Vero Beach. And there is a little bit more about inclusion here. Oh, and then we also have a comment that it was difficult to be shamed by a fellow classmate during conversion because as a public librarian, I had to work on Saturdays. It is enough to discourage anyone from conversion. Yes, we want to make sure that when we're teaching about these rituals, that we're not shaming people by saying, this is what's, I think really try to say, this is what's traditional, but that doesn't mean this is a have to or a should do. This is the tradition. Here are some of the variations, and what do you want to do? And that's actually and Maria, I'm sorry that I encourage people to read Marie's comments, but I really want to make sure we get to this last question. What would you say if you were saying this techina, if you were setting an intention while you were lighting candles, what might you say? And you can put it in the chat. And I'll read the rest of Marie's comment while people are thinking. I had never been welcomed with open arms anywhere until I went to Temple Beth Shalom of Vero Beach. People there tried to understand my differences instead of looking at my differences. I actually felt loved in service and wasn't just told about it. I heard the message of how important it was for everyone to bring their unique light and love into the world. This struck me so intensely. I felt like I may have had a reason to be alive despite me feeling or not having any worth or purpose in my life. Since 2018, when I converted, I have flourished in Judaism. I am home here. I wanted to say this because of the idea of how important the idea of inclusion is in Judaism. Absolutely. So now we have some of our techinas are coming in. From Marlene, hopefully my gift to God is acceptable. So similar to the traditional techina of may this be acceptable as the temple worship was acceptable.
So I'm going to just add on what might I say in a candlelighting techina. If I was a traditional Jewish woman and not going off to worship in a synagogue, I might include the types of prayers that I might say in the traditional service, or frankly, in a traditional Reform service. I might ask for health for me and my family. I might ask for the opportunity to create time for myself to learn and reflect. I might ask for strength to get through the week to come, and the wisdom to give myself the gift of the rest of Shabbat. I see some beautiful ones. May this light guide me through the week, and may lighting these Shabbat candles bring light into the world. Absolutely. And Rabbi Berkowitz, I think we're going to end with one of these newfangled techinas, right?
Yes, this is from, there's two in here. Oh, I lost my, oh, no, this is not good. This is our first technical difficulty in the whole class. Wonderful. Just give me 1 second. Okay. So this is from a colleague and friend of ours, a contemporary of ours, Rabbi Jen Gubitz. We sometimes call the Gubitzer Rebbe. I'm sorry if I'm making anybody nauseous doing this. I know that this is hard. Okay, so this one is called Finding Light for Shabbat by Rabbi Jen Gubitz. Maybe this year you've been burning the candle at both ends, or maybe you've been working hard on a project and said to yourself when looking to your colleague's success, my work doesn't hold a candle to theirs. Maybe you had an awesome idea, but by the time you finally got the green light, your excitement was snuffed. Or maybe you had an argument and you thought it had been resolved, but you discovered that actually you were light years apart still. Or maybe in this past year, your self-reflection shed light on something in your life that brings you joy that you never noticed before. And maybe in this past year, in the clear light of day, you were lost and then you were found. Maybe in this past year, after periods of darkness, finally there was light at the end of the tunnel. We kindle light every Shabbat and every festival day, the hallowed tallow of our tradition. As you gaze into their flame tonight and this coming year, may they illuminate your struggles and your successes. May they cast light, the light of comfort and clarity. May they light your path to renewal and return. So I'm sensing this was one that was done on a Shabbat that's close to the High Holy Days. But I think that's a good note to end on, though we're happy to take more techinas and more questions. We want to be respectful of the time constraints. I'm going to put in the chat one more time the text sheet. So if you want to take a closer look at the techinas, or you want to go over your text again, or write down questions to ask your own personal rabbi, that is welcome.
I just want to say thanks to my colleague, Rabbi Leah Berkowitz. And I also really, on behalf of both of us, we want to say thank you to Rabbi Michael Bernholz for organizing all this. I'm so proud to see so many Temple Manuel of Tempe members online. And thank you all for being here present with us, no matter what community you're from.
Yes, I'm very grateful to Rabbi Olshein and Rabbi Bernholz, and to everybody who's participating both as a student and as a teacher in these sessions. This is a great gift of the age that we're living in, and I'm so glad that we get to do this together.
And just so you know, just seeing so many colleagues online, boy, a little intimidating when you know you have colleagues learning with you. So thank you. Thank you for sharing your precious time with us.
Yes.
This is better than my wildest dreams, to bring so many folks together from across the country. What an amazing hour of learning. Thank you both so much. And to my congregants, don't be surprised if you hear some of this repeated in all kinds of different ways. This is tremendous because it gives all of us opportunity to be teachers and learners. As I said, next Wednesday at noon, I will be joined by Rabbi Rachel Jackson, who is in Hendersonville, North Carolina. We'll be teaching about tzitzit, the Jewish fidget toy par excellence. And we will be discussing why we think that is the most important Jewish ritual. This is a wonderful opportunity for study. So again, tell your friends. We can accommodate a lot more folks from across the country in different congregations. If you do miss a session, they will be posted to our YouTube channel. And we welcome you to learn and to join and bring your light and your love and your spirit and strength to all of these sessions. I will also just call everybody's attention. There is a small congregation to Kindling Shavuot that many of the folks who are part of this Counting of the Omer program will be part of as well. So keep your eyes out for registration for that. It is not out yet, but for that night of Shavuot, we'll be teaching it all hours of the night on different coasts, all kinds of wonderful programs. So again, to Rabbi Olshein and Rabbi Berkowitz, thank you both so much for starting us off. This was wonderful and fantastic, and I am so excited with all of my colleagues and all of you joining us as students to be able to share this. Take care, everyone, and thank you so much.